A very hearty good afternoon to one and all present here. I welcome you all to the afternoon session of the Heritage History Association's Fest of 2022, Tathastu. I would request everyone to please switch on their cameras to make this session more indulgent and interactive. Also, students, please note that the attendance for this program will be taken once at the beginning and then again in the end. So I request everyone to be engaged throughout the session. I kindly request everyone again to rename themselves according to batch year and roll number for easy navigation during the Q&A. Tathastu 2022, under the aegis of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, is aiming to celebrate the resilience of human society in the face of turbulence. It acknowledges the adversity it encounters and overcomes. With the theme Trust, Turbulence, and Triumph, it seeks to celebrate the indomitable human spirit. The focus of the academic sessions is on pressing issues of national and international concern, mainly social justice, environmentalism, violence, and conflict resolution. These have become all the more pertinent with the challenge posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Tathastu engages the youth by creating awareness along with entertainment in the cultural sessions. So let us all immerse ourselves in today's conference on the theme Peace and Violence, Contemporary Contemplations. I'd like to invite our head of department, Dr. Manisha Sharma ma'am, to welcome the speaker for today's sessions. Dr. Manisha Sharma is Associate Professor in the Department of History, Janki Devi Memorial College, University of Delhi since 2007. She has a teaching experience of more than 14 years and has authored and published 4 books on Buddhism, its origins, traditions, and practices. She has written and presented many research papers in national and international journals and conferences. She has also been awarded with the International Award for Excellence in Research. Over to you, ma'am.
Shambhavi. Good afternoon, everyone. Our speaker for the day is Dr. Aparna Vaidik. I welcome her. Dr. Aparna Vaidik is a historian of South Asia and associate professor of history at Ashoka University. She has previously taught at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., and University of Delhi. She is a recipient of grants from the British Academy and Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Her publications include Waiting for Swaraj, Inner Lives of Indian Revolutionaries, published by the Cambridge University Press, 2021. And My Son's Inheritance, A Secret History of Lynching and Blood Justice in India, published by the Aleph 2022. Imperial Andamans, a Colonial Encounter and Island History, published by the Macmillans 2010. And her Revolutionaries on Trial, Sedition, Betrayal and Martyrdom is a forthcoming publication of 2022. I welcome Dr. Aparna Vaidik to kindly speak on the topic.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Hello, everyone. It'll be nice to have some more students' faces. It's always lovely to see your faces, actually, just simply because of that. And it just makes, talking to everyone much easier in this virtual world. But no pressure. It'll be just nice to see some more bobbing faces. Now, before I begin, I want to first thank my dear friend Tara. We were like you people some decades back now. Okay, that sounds awfully long, but we were like you in college together. So it's lovely for me to come to her college where she teaches now and speak to her students. And there is 2 other connections I have to Janki Devi College. My mother was also an undergraduate at this college in the 1960s. And that's what makes this college so special for me. So it's like coming back to the place where my mother studied. Yeah, and some of her, now she's not there anymore. So some of her friends till the end of her life were actually made in this college. And her friend, Dr. Devkanya Arya, retired as a Sanskrit teacher from this college, and several others. So, and I remember as a child, I would come to Janki Devi College for, they had their 50 years or some sort of a celebration. Maybe it was Golden Jubilee or something. And the Indian Prime Minister was supposed to come there. So I accompanied my mother like a little, when I was a little child, to the college and then again to see her friends several times in the residences. So when Tara asked me, a part of me just like, not only because Tara asked me, but, it was this, the college has it's entangled with my own emotional life in that way. And the third connection I have with Janki Devi is that I've taught there for 1 week. They needed a guest lecturer to come, and this was way back again, several years ago. So I taught for about a week, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, or I forget now how long. So I did have a chance to even teach in Janki Devi. Those are my ad hoc days. So I've taught in about 7 different Delhi University colleges before going off to US. So yeah, so this is like a very happy occasion for me as well. And thank you for the honor. Thank you, Dr. Manisha Sharma and Dr. Tara Shimar. Okay, so today I thought I would speak to you about myth and violence, how myths and violence are connected, and how they can help us reflect on the contemporary society, how they can provide, how history can provide a doorway into understanding our times. Yeah, so I'm talking to undergraduates all the time. So I've tried to make my talk as bearable as possible, as interesting as possible. Yeah, and not to put you to sleep. So I'll speak for about 30-35 minutes. And I may invite you to share your thoughts in the middle. So please feel free to put your whatever you have to say in the chat, or unmute and speak when you asked, if your disciplinary team is fine with that. Yeah. So okay, so I'll show you 1 or 2 images also in the middle. Yeah, I hope I can just allow me to screen share. Yeah, make me a co-host. Okay, so I'll first talk about myths. Now, many of you must, you're familiar with myths. Myths are part of our lives. Myths or mythological stories are part of our lives in a number of ways. And many of the ancient myths that were there in our society have gradually made their way into, fairy tales, children's literature, even like proper adult literature and philosophy. So I'll give you some examples of these myths, yeah, and then talk a little bit about what role myths play in our lives, and then connect it up with one of the myths that I want to explore. And that in turn, I'll connect up with violence. Huh? So you see, yours generation, I know that Harry Potter is not being read as much. It was a rage about 10 years back, but many of you might still be doing Harry Potter fan writing and all that. So you know that the Harry Potter books have a lot of, are premised on a lot of Greek myths. Yeah, so myths are there even in the regular literature that you read. And many of you might have grown up on Disney animation. And many of the Disney characters are based on Greek myths like Hercules, Medusa, Minotaur, or Poseidon, or Zeus, or, all these are Greek mythological characters. And then myths also made their way into literature. So Spinoza, Albert Camus, like they have all written on myth of Sisyphus. So Sisyphus was this guy who kept rolling the stone up the hill, and the moment he would get on the top of the hill, the stone would roll back. And then he again would start rolling the stone up. So his name is Sisyphus. So a lot has been written on this myth of Sisyphus. Then some of you, maybe Tara and Dr. Manisha's generation, we used to read Ayn Rand. I don't know how many of you in your generation now read Ayn Rand. So Ayn Rand has written this famous book called Atlas Shrugged. Now, Atlas is also a mythological character from Greek mythology. The Atlas is the guy who bears the burden of the world on his shoulders. Yeah, and the book is called Atlas Shrugged. So it's the person who bears the world's burden on his shoulders. When they shrug their shoulders, what happens to the world? So really the book is about that. So it's again drawing on this Greek mythology. Now you have several softwares also named after, either they carry a Greek name or they're named after these characters. So you have Android, like the phones and all, Apollo, Thanos, and a very famous one which has recently been in news, Any idea which one? The one based on a Greek mythological character. It's been in news recently, quite a bit. Any guesses? The horse with wings. Anyone?
Omicron.
Horse. It's hardly a horse with wings. Yeah, but it's a software. I'm talking about a software. Yes, Pegasus. Thank you, Kanchan. You got it. The first year got it. Okay. So shame on the third years. But yes, so the Pegasus is also a mythological, character. So myths are very much a part of life, or mythological characters are part of our lives. Yeah. And then closer home, I've been giving you examples from Greek myths. Now, closer home, we have our own mythological stories and, characters. So many of them primarily come from epics like Mahabharata and Ramayana. Yeah. Or there is one very, these characters, most, they're there. And, or they'll come from Puranas, or they also come from regional literatures. So like from Tamil, there is Parya Puranam and Nalira Divya Prabandham. Yeah. And in Bengal, those of you who are Bengali, you would know there is the Mangal Kavya. So there are lots of these, regional literature or literary forms that have also contributed to a lot of Indian mythology. Yeah. So like one myth that my mother-in-law believes in, which I love actually, is coming from Vrindavan. So she always, and she swears by it. Yeah. And which is that at night there is one lawn or a park or a garden in Vrindavan where Krishna comes for his Leela. Yeah. And you can actually see him dancing and all. But if you ask her, have you ever seen it? She says, no, I have never been there at night. So if you ask her, do you know someone who's seen it? So she'll say, नहीं, वो देख ही नहीं सकते, possible ही नहीं है. तो कैसे possible नहीं है? क्योंकि जो देख लेगा, so there are 2-3 explanations of person who has seen it. जो देख लेगा वो तो वहीं रासलीला ही करता रह जाएगा, कभी वापस नहीं आएगा या अंधा हो जाएगा. तो बेसिकली उसका कोई प्रूफ नहीं होता है myth का कभी. There is no proof. हाँ, myth exists in itself. The fact there is a myth is an evidence in itself. Yeah, it doesn't have to proclaim its truth. The fact that it is truth enough. और ये myth की एक खूबी होती है कि उसको आप ना तो प्रूव कर सकते हैं, ना उसको आप डिस्प्रूव कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि वो होती है. ठीक है ना? तो like it's a character in a story. Yeah, the character doesn't have to justify their presence in a story. The character simply exists. Yeah, similarly, myths simply exist. And then these mythical characters, which are really interesting on most days, they have made their way into our lives through literature, through fairy tales, and even through philosophy. Yeah, so this is what really myths do for us. They are ever present in our lives, but we many times don't see them. Or many times we don't see the meaning hidden in them. Yeah. So today I'm going to be talking about why myths. What do they do for us? How they connected with violence, and how can we understand them to, understand our present day reality? Yeah. So, as I was telling you about that Vrindavan myth of Krishna doing Ras Leela with all the gopis at night, and nobody ever having witnessed it. Yeah. So, what kind of myth it is? Now, this myth narrates an event. Yeah. Now, and the event is the Ras Leela. Yeah. However, this is not a Ras Leela you and I can do. This is only something only Krishna and his gopis can do. So there is a sacred quality to these myths. Yeah, this myth is sacred. And the sacred communication is being done in a symbolic form. Yeah, that there is an imagination of a garden, and there is so it is not like it's a banks of river or something. It's staged in a particular way, staged in a enclosed space. ऐसे खुले में बस कहीं हो रहा है, वहां होता था ऐसा नहीं, उसको लोकेशन दे दिया है पूरा. So there is symbolic meaning attached to it. And the events that occur, or the people who are there in the myth, never really exist in the outer world, outside of the myth. So we can't really spot another person and say, ye Krishna ji hai, right? So, or we can say, acha ye Ras Leela ho rahi hai type. Yeah. So मिथ के होने का मतलब यही है कि उसमें जो है वो बाहर हो ऐसा जरूरी नहीं है, ऐसी कोई डिमांड नहीं होती है मिथ पर. मिथ अपने आप में कंप्लीट होता है. Yeah. So myth, the events or the people in the myth neither occur nor exist in the world other than in the myth itself. Yeah. So अगर पूछता है कोई, जैसे इसी में एक सवाल उठ सकता है कि मिथ और एक लेजेंड जो होता है, हाँ, किस्से कहानी जो एक होती है, उसमें क्या फर्क है? What's the difference between myth and legend? So people will say that myths, what distinguishes them is myths have a sacred quality to them. Yeah. Now legends are more like folk tales. हाँ, लोक कहानियां, लोकगीत, या जो किस्से कहानियां जो बोली जाती हैं, या दास्तान गोई जैसे आपने, या किस्सेबाजी होती है, तो उससे मिथ्स अलग होती हैं. हाँ. और जो मिथ्स होती हैं उनमें एक सीक्रेट क्वालिटी होती है, तो वो कृष्ण के आसपास होगी, या उसमें कुछ एक इनडिस्प्यूटेबल फैक्ट होगा, या उसके अंदर ही ऐसा कुछ सिंबलिज्म होगा जो सीक्रेट होगा. Yeah, so that's what distinguishes myths from legends. Now, again, a question can be asked: how are myths? Yes, is there a question? Okay, somebody just raised their hand. So somebody can also ask, what's the difference between a myth and history? Are they really different from each other? Or can they be the same? Because for many people, myths are history. Yeah, and there could be history in myths. हाँ, तो दोनों में फर्क क्या है? Now, जो फर्क है वो, the difference is what I've just said, that myths are eternal and timeless. They're not bound to a context. They're not bound to a particular time or space. But history tends to be bound to its context. Yeah, and history is not timeless. There is a temporal quality to that. Yeah, and history writing, the way we write history, is premised on evidence. हाँ, वो एविडेंस देना पड़ता है, उसका एक वो देना पड़ता है कि हाँ ये था, हुआ था, और इसके आधार पे हमने लिखा है. पर मिथ के पास ऐसा कोई डिमांड नहीं है. देयर इज नो, द मिथ इज नेवर आस्क्ड टू प्रूव इटसेल्फ टू बी ट्रू और नॉट. Yeah, history may be claimed to be true or not, but that's not something we can ask of the myth. Yeah, myth serves as its own evidence. And when I say myth serves as its own evidence, I am going back to the example I gave you of my mother-in-law, the myth that she believes in of there being Krishna and gopis. She doesn't need evidence to believe in it. As a historian, I'll ask for evidence, but myths, their myths are a kind of telling that serve as their own evidence. Yeah, they don't carry the burden of proof. They don't carry the burden of, being truthful. That's not their concerns. So, so this is what makes myths a story a lot of people believe in, whether it's true or not. It doesn't have to be true. And many times they also know it's not true, but they will still believe in it. Yeah, that's the power of a myth. So if we look at inside the myth, one is looking at the till now, what I was doing was I was looking at the myth from outside for you. How a historian would look at a myth, or how I am looking at people who believe in certain myths. But if you look at the internal structure of a myth, if you go inside a myth and interrogate it, so inside the myth, the way the myth is narrated, it's almost like a symphony. Each part is connected to the other, and the one that precedes is connected to the one that has come before, and the one that's going to come to next. So the way the story is told inside a myth, it appears absolutely natural. When you hear a myth, you're like, of course, that's the way it is. So the characters and the actions of the characters in the story appear natural. Yeah. So myths, by their very nature, the way they are, can end up making things appear very natural. Yeah, where else will Krishna go and dance with his gopis? Yeah, it's obvious. It's in the park and they're going there. So, and what else would he do? In a park with them. So like that. So there is a internal structure to the myths also, and the way the myths are told, many scholars say that they also masquerade as, or they also pass off as innocent speech. Yeah, by innocent speech, we mean that they are devoid of any politics, ideology, or any signification of that kind that can be understood from outside. हाँ, तो almost apolitical होती है, किससे कहानी का रूप ले लेती है myth. और उसमें अपनी कोई ऐसी कोई खास पॉलिटिक्स नहीं होती है, अपनी आइडियोलॉजी नहीं होती है. They're not tethered to anything. जैसे अब history में तो होता है ना, ideology, there is ideology. We are ideologically driven, or we may have framework that is embedded in a particular kind of ideology or a belief system. But myths are, and that's why myths are seen as eternal and timeless, because they can transcend their context and move across time. Yeah. So, and that's what all these things together give myths their power. So if one were to ask, why do we have myths? Why can't we just have storytelling? Why can't we just have history? Why do we have myths? And what do they tell us about a society? Or to change the question a little bit, what role do myths play in a society's life? कोई भी society जो है वो myth क्यों बनाती है? उसको myth की जरूरत क्या है? Why does my mother-in-law need to believe in this gopis dancing at night in Vrindavan? What does it do for her? Why should we believe in myths? Why do societies have myths? Why does Harry Potter premise itself on all these Greek myths? Yeah, why do we have all these stories from Mahabharata and Ramayana? Now, very simply put, myths do two things for us, which is relevant for what I want to build next. Now, myths anchor the present in a past. Yeah, I'll explain this in a minute. And it locates things in time, even if the time in it remains unspecified. In the sense that एक समय था जब कृष्ण थे. So it has established Krishna. There was a time when there was Krishna. So it's established the existence of Krishna while needing to tell us when that time was. So what it has done is established an existence for us. It has anchored a certain notion of Krishna in time, his existence in time, without actually specifying when that time was. Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. I can't say Alexander once lived. I'll have to give some dates, no? But in a myth, you can just say that person existed, and that person can exist without being tethered to any time. Yeah. So myths play a role of anchoring, giving existence to characters who are timeless or whose time is not specified. Yeah. And myths also, more importantly, establish the order of things. Yeah, like Mahabharata is a battle of righteous against the wrong. So the order of things is established. So myths always play this role. They have this battle of morality within them, and one sub-person is supposed to win. Yeah, so they serve as a legitimation device. Not only do they anchor certain imaginations, they also serve as legitimations. जैसे हमारा एक imagination है, उसको anchor देता है वो. ये कृष्ण थे, how do I anchor it? I anchor it through a myth, because I don't actually have historical evidence for it. Yeah, and it also serves us to legitimize a certain way of being. So it's okay for Krishna to be dancing with gopis at night, but all of you should come back home at 10 o'clock and wear salwar kameez. There's a night curfew for all of you. Okay, only Krishna is allowed. I'm just kidding with you guys. So myths play that kind of role for us. ठीक है, अभी ये myth के बारे में थोड़ा मैंने आपको बताया. I've told you a little bit about the myth. Now what I'm going to do is explore one myth very quickly for you guys. So does anybody want to ask me anything? I know Q&A is after this, but I hope I'm, because it's a little philosophical what I'm saying about myths. I hope I've been able to convey that to you of what myths mean. Yes, Dr. Sharma?
Yes, Dr. Aparna, actually I've told the students to put up their questions after you speak,
Okay,
so that there is no disturbance. But even if you want somebody, you can ask questions from any student you feel like, or in general also.
Okay,
that is absolutely okay.
ठीक है, तो अगर आपका कोई सवाल है तो आप chat में just put an exclamation mark and I'll call on you, and then you can quickly ask me a question if you haven't followed something, because I know I'm addressing most of you are students, so आपके लिए हो रहा है ये. हाँ, आपके टीचर्स के लिए नहीं हो रहा है तो आप सवाल पूछ सकते हैं। तो चलिए फिर मैं आपको आई विल वॉक यू थ्रू वन मिथ, एंड फिर उसके बारे में थोड़ा एक्सप्लोर करेंगे कि क्या है उस मिथ में। तो ये जो मिथ है वो है शंभुक का। अब आपने कई लोगों ने इसका सुना होगा, कईयों ने नहीं सुना होगा। नाउ शंभुक इज अ सेज, ही इज अ सेज, और इनका जो रेफरेंस आता है वो आता है उत्तरकांड में, वाल्मीकि रामायण में, in the book 7 of Uttarkhand or Uttarkand of Valmiki Ramayana. Now, Shambhuk doesn't appear in Tulsi's Ramcharitmanas. Okay, so he's one character who appears in one version of Ramayana. Now, Shambhuk is a story. So, kahani aise hai. The story is that there's a Brahmin who comes to King Ram and he's weeping. And he's really howling, beating his chest and saying that his son has died. और उसकी अकाल मृत्यु हुई है. It's an unprompted death. It was not destined. He was not destined to die. It's an akal mrityu. And then the Brahmin declares that his son has died prematurely because King Ram has not been performing his Varna Dharma. So King Ram has failed to perform his duty or his ritual duty, and that's why the brunt of that fell on his son. So Ram is really, upset, and he's like, okay, I am such a righteous king. How did I fail to do this? Then, in all the stories, there is some sort of Akashwani or Narad comes in. Narayan, he comes in and he tells Ram, you have deviated from path of dharma. And then he tells him something. He gives him a tip. And how is he deviated from path of dharma? He says there is a Shudra transgressing the Varna dharma by doing penance, tapas, deep in the forest. So Ram is enraged and he, picks up his, Gandiv, and is it Gandiv or is it Arjuna's Gandiv? Okay, anyway, he picks up his bow and arrow and he runs into the forest. Yeah, and he does find an ascetic practicing tapas in the forest. And he asks Shambhuk, who is he? And Shambhuk confirms that he's indeed a Shudra. And then what Ram does is beheads him. Unka gala kaat dete. Now, the moment Ram beheads Shambhuka, the Brahmin's son is restored to life. Because Shambhuka's performance of penance was in violation of the dharma. And the bad karma from that had resulted in the Brahmin's son's death. So that's the myth. Now I'm going to just quickly show you one image that goes with this. I'm just going to quickly screen share because this image appears, it's a medieval image. Okay, can you guys see the image?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
This is Ram, and he is beheading Shambhuka. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop share. Just wanted to show you this image. So here is the myth of sage Shambhuka from the Uttarakhand of Valmiki Ramayana. Now the question for us is, why does Ram do this? What's the need for Ram to go and Lord Ram to cut Shambhuka's head or to behead him? Now, there can be two explanations for this, which are generally given. Now, one is that Shambhuka deliberately violated the dharma in order to get Ram's attention. Because getting his head cut or getting beheaded by him was a way of attaining salvation. Because the path of salvation was not actually available to a Shudra. So this was Shambhuka's way of attaining salvation because his head had been severed by Ram. Yeah. Second explanation is Shambhuka deserved the punishment because he was wrong in doing what he was doing. He was violating the ritual order of that society. तो punishment सही थी उसके लिए, सही punishment थी, क्योंकि उसने गलत किया था. And therefore, it fell upon Ram, Lord Ram, to restore the order of things. So what you see the myth is doing, it's anchoring our imagination of Ram as the king who upholds the order of things. Order of things के लिए एक और word है व्यवस्था, हाँ, समाज तंत्र, जो व्यवस्था का ध्यान रखे, ऐसे राजा की परिकल्पना को ये जो मिथक है वो एंकर करता है, ठीक है ना. So it's helping us imagine Ram as a lawgiver, Ram as a righteous ruler, and in this imagination is also embedded Shambhuka's salvation. Yeah. Now, what's the explanation for the violence that Ram inflicts on Shambhuka? What's the explanation for this? Now, the explanation that is given for this is violence done to uphold dharma is not violence, because dharma purifies violence. ठीक है, गीता का सार भी यही है, ठीक है ना. Arjuna is sitting there, he's feeling so bad, I'm going to kill my uncles, I'm going to kill my teacher. So what does Krishna say to him? This is not your dharma is to go fight. You're not supposed to be worrying. They are all dead anyways. Look, विराट रूप जब आता है ना, सब मुझी से जन्म पाते हैं, मुझी में लीन हो जाते हैं, हाँ, संसार मुझी से शुरू, संसार मुझी से खत्म. So you forget about that, you go and fight. So violence, so dharma purifies violence. Violence doesn't remain violence if done to uphold dharma. That's the legitimation of violence here. So what's our takeaway from this myth? What's our takeaway of our understanding of this? So the takeaway is that violence is not violence if done to uphold dharma. However, it also invisibilizes violence in many ways, because the image that you saw did not actually show Ram cutting Shambhuka's head. All that Ram was doing was holding on to the sword, and the head was severed, shown severed in the image. So Ram is never really shown inflicting violence. Yeah, and that's again very important. The way the image is drawn is very important because it shows Ram not committing violence. So there is an invisibilization of violence here. Because violence to hua hi nahi na. What happened, what was done was dharma. Violence didn't even happen. Yeah. So this invisibilization of violence does three things for us. This upholding of dharma does three things for us. And I'll quickly walk you through it because I think I've already been speaking for about 30 minutes. So, you know, the invisibilization creates an imagination of Hinduism as tolerant and as a capacious religion. Violence hi nahi hai yahan to. It's a capacious religion. It's a tolerant religion. So be it anyone, be it Amartya Sen, Shashi Tharoor, Devdutt Patnaik, anybody who writes about Hinduism, you know, they all invoke ahimsa. They all invoke Ashoka. They all invoke Sufi and Bhakti tradition. They all invoke Gandhi to present a pacifist and a tolerant imagination of Hinduism. Because there is no violence in Hinduism. Because all the violence that exists is being committed in the name of dharma. So just one, I'll again screen share and show you one more image. So you see the hand raised in all these images for peace. When you see these images, when you see these images, you don't really see violence. You see pacifist gods, right? You don't see violence. But the reason you don't see violence is because nobody is using violence in any of these. There is nothing violent happening in these images. And yet, all the gods are carrying weapons of war. They're carrying this over here. There is a trishul here. There is a weapon here. And each time the weapon is there, it is meant to uphold dharma. So there is no violence in Hinduism. I'm going to stop sharing. You must be wondering which way am I going? What am I trying to advocate to you? Whether there is violence in Hindu, what am I trying to tell you guys, young minds? Am I trying to corrupt you by telling you going one way or the other? Now, both the ways are corrupted these days. So, I will play safe. I will leave you to assume whether there is violence or not. So basically, Hinduism is a pacifist religion, despite all the gods carrying weapons. And if they're carrying weapons, it's for protecting dharma. The second assumption it creates is about the nature of violence itself. Yeah, it tells us that violence is, unless it is good violence, which is in protection of dharma, violence is otherwise an aberration, an anomaly. Yeah, violence is bad. It creates an imagination of violence. Violence is bad. Yeah, and violence is bad because the human condition is really peaceful and non-violent and premised on tolerance. That violence is bad and people who do violence are bad. So it generates certain presumptions about what violence is. Violence is bad and violence is an aberration and violence is something that bad people do. Or violence is that, violence is something, those mafia movies that we see, gangsters, mobs, criminals, they do violence. Or, the state does violence. State may do violence, as, in the political philosophy, you have state has the monopoly of violence. Yeah, so the state may do violence, or people who do violence are really the lumpen folks. खराब लोग, गुंडे लोग करते हैं violence. हिंसा करने वाला गुंडा है. Yeah, क्योंकि हम तो हिंसा करते ही नहीं. So who does it exonerate? Who does it leave out? This definition of violence and this invisibilization of violence, who does it leaves free to commit violence? Now, the people who are left free to do violence are people like us. People who actually believe that Hinduism is a warm and fuzzy religion. It's a religion of tolerance. Yeah, which sees Shambhuka as the person who's doing wrong and therefore having to atone for his crime. Yeah. So this imagination of violence actually structures our own imagination. आपका और मेरा imagination उससे बंधा हुआ है, क्योंकि हिंसा करने वाले तो वो लोग हैं वहां, बुरे लोग हैं. We don't do violence. Yeah, because we don't see violence actually. We don't see violence. Violence is invisible to us. And this is exactly the phenomenon of the ordinary middle-class person unable to see violence and unable to see themselves as an agent of violence, has been termed by this, Jewish American writer Hannah Arendt as banality of evil. Banality mane commonness, widespread, मतलब आम तरीके का evil, banality of evil. क्योंकि एक तो evil वो है जो हिटलर की तरह है, एक तो evil वो है जो लॉर्ड वॉलमोट की तरह है, ठीक है ना? लेकिन एक है banality of evil, everyday common people. ऐसे ही तो जैसे मेरी और आपकी शक्ल वाले लोग. हाँ, एक तो होता है evil जो चेहरे से भी evil दिखाई देता है, उसके 2 horns हैं ये वो. Now this banality of evils is what she's describing. So, and she's talking about it in the context of Jewish Holocaust. And she's saying that the Jewish Holocaust was not just carried out by big generals and officers, but normal everyday people. The person who was turning on the switch of the gas chamber, or the person who was going and reporting on their Jewish neighbors, were ordinary people like you and me. And this is what she calls banality of evil. And see, in history, when we historians are writing, it's very easy to understand the mind of, say, Spinoza, Dante, Nehru, Gandhi, Savarkar, Hedgevar. बड़े लोगों का इतिहास लिखना बहुत आसान होता है. It's very easy to write history of big people. It's very easy to write histories of kings and queens. But it's infinitely harder to grasp the mind of an ordinary person, of an obscure person who actually can also become an agent of violence. Because violence is invisible to them, because they see themselves as tolerant, and because they believe violence is something other people do. Yeah. And this is where I think India's tolerance fails. Why do we despite, why do we have to keep talking about tolerance all the time? And why does India society fails to be tolerant? Because most of us for most of us, violence is invisibilized. Most of us presume violence to be something bad done by bad people, not by people like us. But it's there in our midst. So, and this violence then, and this sort of notion, these our tolerance, this notion of tolerance that we have, which is actually premised on invisibilization of violence, really opens us up to majoritarianism, जहाँ पे majority एक भीड़ बन जाती है, majority एक झुंड बन जाती है. इतनी जल्दी हम झुंड क्यों बन जाते हैं? इतनी जल्दी हम लोग उठा के पत्थर मारने को क्यों तैयार हो जाते हैं? बिकॉज वायलेंस करने वाले तो वो है ना. हम तो जब पत्थर उठाते हैं तो धर्म की रक्षा के लिए उठाते हैं. Yeah. So that is where I think I would like to end over here to talk about why myths are important. Going back to that thing. So myths anchor our imaginations. Myths justify order of things. So if you want to understand violence, if you want to understand what tolerance is, turn to your myths. And suddenly you will start seeing a lot of violence in them. And ask yourself, why is violence being presented in a particular way in a myth? What does tolerance actually mean? Is tolerance a gift that the majoritarian community gives to the minority communities? Or is it something that can be a mutual process? Is it ever like that? Or why is it never reciprocal? And how can we become more tolerant? And how can we have newer myths, different myths, which are actually myths of tolerance and not of violence? Okay, I'm going to stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aparna, for enlightening us on the topic myth and violence. Of course, what you have told us about the meaning of myth, the myths anchoring the present in the past, and about characters of Krishna and Rama, and these people being the upholder of doing violence for upholding the order. Thank you so much for that. Another thing I just wanted to, associate with the story of Krishna, of the Nidhi one, is I have also heard about people, who believe in these myths that before, they start those dancing things in the Nidhi one, there is also a plate being decorated by the priest there, and उसमें सारे श्रृंगार की चीजें होती हैं. And it is said that when he comes in the morning, तो वो सारे श्रृंगार की चीजें लगाई हुई होती हैं. Sindoor and everything is being, spread out as if somebody has used it. Although the temple is, locked by the priest. So this is also what I have heard about this particular myth that you have talked about. Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for enlightening us. It was a very interesting session about, all the mythical characters and how, evils, how evils are being upholded by particular, characters like Rama and the Shambuk example of Ramayana that you've given us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anybody who wants to ask any questions may please ask.
I may have said stuff, or I may have walked you through material which you may not have had a chance to think about earlier. And just want to say my attempt is not to violate anybody's sensibility, religious sensibility here, but to just have us think about our own religion, to think about the world around us, think about the myths around us. Yeah, and how we believe in them uncritically.
I have an observation, really more take time to the students to think about questions. So thanks, Aparna. I really enjoyed your talk, and coming from ancient India, where myths are so important for us. But what I'm really reminded of is these two recent readings. One is you all know Harari and Homo sapiens, where he's speaking about this, the evolution in human society, major points of change rather in human society, and how when humans, they start to organize themselves from that small bands into larger numbers, and that's when myths come into play. So they become very important. So here myths are connected with the fact that humans can organize themselves in larger numbers. So order in society. The second thing I'm reminded of is a recent documentary I viewed. It's made by a French director, I can't remember his name, Monopoly of Violence. And it's really, you know, all these little videos which are on social media about the Gilles Drone, you know, this recent sort of protests in Paris, which were put down by the state. So here the whole discussion is the state and violence. And does the state have monopoly over violence? And is that valid, or who then, I mean, can people express themselves in violence? So I was just thinking about this, and, you know, I was wondering then how then state order myths, right? And now in the modern period, then how do we then proceed? What do we connect with?
Yeah. So, you know, this idea of, this is a Weberian idea of state, you know, of the state holds monopoly of violence. And that's why the state also generates myths, which again bears out the point that there is an attempt to invisibilize the violence. The myths legitimate state violence. आजकल एक और आप state security के national security. This is a national security issue. And then that's again a myth that justifies a lot of violence. So, like, I'm glad, Tara, you brought that up. Like, even the states generate their myths. Communities generate their myths. Patriarchy generates its myth. Racism generates its myth. Like, one of the myths of racism is that Blacks are lazy. They don't do what they're supposed to do. Myths of patriarchy is that women need to be protected. Women need to wear certain kinds of clothes. Yeah. And all that, you know. So yes, all power structures like state, all isms generate their own myths.
Thanks. I mean, but I do also, I'm generally observational, and I do notice that there's intolerance, and not just, I mean, it's not just a majoritarian issue. It's also, I mean, everybody has myths of intolerance.
Yeah, sure. It is not to say that the minority will not have patriarchy in it.
Yes.
Yeah, or may not have race, or may not have internalized majoritarianism, because it's quite possible that the men become the representatives in minority. So that's there. But majority also is hegemonic. Majorities tend to be hegemonic. And when the majorities believe in their own myths, that's when the problem starts. That's when you stop seeing the violence completely. It is, and here I'm talking, I didn't talk about it very forcefully. There's a lot of caste violence that gets justified in this manner. Yeah, because वो तो है ही नहीं ना, उसने गलती करी, उसने हमारे बर्तन में पानी पी लिया, उसने वो लाइन क्रॉस कर ली, वो यहाँ आया कैसे? वो तो घर के अंदर आ गया, उसको दरवाजे के बाहर, you know, things like that. So there is some line that person is crossing, and therefore inflicting of punishment becomes the most obvious and natural thing to do. And that's how caste violence operates. उस लड़के ने हमारी community की लड़की की तरफ देख लिया, or something like that. You know, all of you grown up enough and read newspapers enough to know what I'm talking about. So
yeah, thanks. Students.
And thank you, Shanvi, for your comment. Yeah, sure, Ishika. It's a personal, religion is a personal choice. But having coming to college and getting education and developing critical thinking is also part of why college education is important. So definitely religion is a personal choice. And the fact that you can put Jai Shri Ram in a comment box and get away with it. And if somebody was to put Allahu Akbar here, and that would become a problem. So that's something to think for us to think about.
Dr. Aparna, I would just like to say something, that I think in India, this, violence related with these myths associated with religion is increasing in India. And I mean, I can just foresee that violence may increase to a further extent due to these myths that are associated with the particular religions.
You want me to talk about other religions?
No, I don't want to talk about any religion in particular, but I feel that, all violence in India, specifically related with religion and the myths related with religion, is increasing. That's what
Yeah,
I just feel, that
yeah, yeah,
an observation.
yeah, yeah.
As you said, that all the, everything in the religion, which is, either related with violence.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a question by Shambhi, which I think is very nice. We'll take that and then we can come to Aditi. That Lord Ram's friendship with Nishad Raj. So I would like to, two different sides and all, I am not going to go there. I will pause on the word friendship. Can the friendship be described as one of equals? Yeah, often the word friendship becomes a smokescreen for a lot else that goes on. It becomes a way of invisibilizing power, power that is never spoken about or never addressed. Yeah, and if they were friends, it was a king meeting another king. That's very different. Yeah, so let's not get into a simplistic binary or a simplistic whataboutery, because that is the easiest thing to prevent any kind of critical thinking. यहाँ है तो वहां पर भी है, सारा टाइम ये मिलता है argument. But is it really the same? Are they really two different sides that are equal and comparable? So just for us to think about that. Yeah, yes, Shanvi. Okay, Aditi, did you want to ask?
Yes, ma'am.
Your hand.
Hello,
Yes, please go.
ma'am. I want to ask that, as you said, that when we think of violence, we consider it to be bad and that we are not doing it. And then we have Ram who is doing violence. But still, when we think of Ram, we do not have a very violent image of Ram. Is it
Yeah.
because the way violence has been projected, or is it because of the opposite stories of Ram, which present him as a really great guy, which nullifies the stories about violence?
See, what happens is that we see life in easy binaries. Ram can be a great king, but he can also be, and he can be carrying out violence in the name of justice, which may appear like injustice, depending on from where we are seeing it. So the commentary that I gave you on with justified Ram's actions, Lord Ram's actions, are the commentary that's available to us. Yeah. Now, where has the critique of what Ram did come from? The critique of what Lord Ram did comes from Dr. Ambedkar's Riddles of Hinduism. It comes from a text called Kuvempu that critiqued Brahmanism. Yeah. So it depends from where you are standing and seeing this. Yeah. If you were standing in Dr. Ambedkar's shoes and assessing the story of Shambuk, yeah, Dr. Ambedkar came from the community that Shambuk came. I mean, came from the Mahar community, but so from that perspective, it seemed like injustice. Yeah, so I'm just saying that a lot, one is not to see the world in easy binaries. Good and evil both reside in the same space. They don't have separate spaces. Evil के लिए कोई खास अलग से कोई पार्क नहीं बना हुआ है जो जहाँ पर evil होता है और एक खास पार्क बना है जहाँ पे रास लीला होती है, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है. They all happen in one place, and your vantage point determines the view you would take of something. And I just told you one story. The question is not that whether Ram was unjust or not. ये यहाँ पे establish करने का प्रयास नहीं है. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just giving you this one story. Ask yourself कि story मुझे क्यों नहीं पता थी? क्यों मैंने शंभुक की कहानी नहीं सुनी? क्यों शंभुक के ऊपर पूरा एक मेरे यहाँ पे रखा है किताब, कुवेम्पू पूरा लिखा हुआ है उसके ऊपर. ऐसा कैसे है कि तमिल में लिखा है, what's that, sorry, South Indian languages, sorry, in 2-3 South Indian languages it appears in Dr. Ambedkar's Riddles of Hinduism, पर वो हमने नहीं पढ़ा कभी, हमने कभी नहीं सुना. तो हमने नहीं सुना तो वो है नहीं क्या? हमने क्यों नहीं सुना, यहाँ पे प्रश्न है. Why have you guys not heard about it? Is something, yes, Kannada, Tamil and Telugu. Thank you, Anushka. Sorry for tripping on the names of the languages. Yeah, Ritesh?
Hi, Aparna. Thank you so much for your talk.
Dr. Manisha said no more questions.
Okay, this is not a question. Anyways, yeah, we can just talk about it later.
Yeah. Sorry for I didn't see the chat.
Actually, Dr. Aparna, the other speaker has come and we need to wind up. So that's why I just said that no more questions.
Yeah, sure. Ritesh, you can just put it in the chat box and I can respond to it or something later.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all.
Students?
Is Shambhavi is supposed
Yes,
to be
yes,
the-
I'm here. Yes. First of all, Aparna ma'am, welcome home. I'm so happy I got to enjoy your lecture in our college, and I'll hope you come back to JDMC for more interesting stories. The reason I chose history, I became an history undergrad, was not because I liked to write historiography or something. It was because of these stories that my mom and dad used to tell me कि इल्तुतमिश ने ऐसा किया फिर ऐसा हुआ. So these stories build your interest in history. So I think myth and history are a bit intertwined, and I really loved how you differentiated them as well. So I would like to again thank Dr. Aparna Vaidik ma'am for such an edifying and thought-provoking lecture. We thoroughly enjoyed the talk and got to see things from a completely new perspective, the differences, the definitions of violence, which is as an anomaly and so on. And all thanks to the insightful wisdom and knowledge given by Dr. Aparna ma'am. So now I'd like to invite over